Why has Elphaba never been played by a Black woman? It makes so much sense when you actually think about it. She's always been a character defined by her otherness, an outsider who's feared and misunderstood, not because of who she is, but because of what she looks like. When you compare that to the reality of being a Black woman in a world that prizes whiteness, Elphaba as a character starts to take on a new life. When it was first announced that Cynthia Erivo would be playing this iconic role, some corners of the internet were very quick to pass some judgment and labeled it as woke casting. But Cynthia's portrayal didn't just work, it elevated the whole story, and Wicked was long overdue some diversity in casting. She ate the role, making this rendition of Wicked for us Black queens. The layers she brought to Elphaba made Wicked more powerful, more relevant, and more personal than it's ever been. The resistance to her casting only proves why representation like this is so necessary. Watching Wicked is always a bit of a cathartic experience.
Really, I thank you, Cynthia. Oh, Cynthia, I'm gonna cry my glitter off. I'm gonna go blind from glitter. No.
But when I watched this new rendition of Wicked for the first time in cinemas, it was emotional. And I'm talking ugly crying in the cinema emotional. And I think that had a lot to do with the new dimension it takes on with a Black woman cast in the role of Elphaba. Now, Wicked has always been about rewriting what you think you know. As a prequel to The Wizard of Oz, it flips the narrative, showing how good and evil aren't always what they seem, more about who decides. This story is a powerful allegory for how history is written by the winners, by the oppressors, and how those who are labeled villains often have their stories erased, distorted, or silenced. With Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba, this theme becomes even more potent. More than just a misunderstood witch, it's about how marginalized people are demonized for stepping out of line, for challenging the status quo, and for daring to defy a world that's stacked against them. A narrative that is synonymous with the Black experience, whatever part of the diaspora you come from. So today, we're gonna explore how Cynthia Erivo's Elphaba reshapes Wicked, giving it more dimension. We'll dive into the layers of race, privilege, power, and friendship dynamics between white women and Black women that this casting brings to the story, and why it makes Wicked more than a musical. It makes it a true reflection of the Black experience. Okay, we have to talk about Elphaba's green skin. It's probably one of the most obvious connections you can make to Blackness in Wicked.
I was fiercely protective of this character because I really wanted for people to see her as more than just the green girl.
And honestly, I find it wild that there was so much resistance to casting a Black woman in this role when the entire story is about how people treat you differently because of your skin color. Like, make it make sense. Elphaba's green skin has always been a powerful symbol of inclusion. It's the thing that instantly marks her as the other, the reason people judge her, fear her, and reject her without ever bothering to know who she really is. That skin is a part of her, but it's also the excuse the world uses to dismiss her. Now, with Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba, the metaphor goes from subtle to undeniable. Casting a Black woman in this role takes that symbolism and makes it harder because the parallels to real life are right there. There are also some key characteristics that have been included in Cynthia Erivo's rendition of Elphaba that are undeniably Black characteristics. There are, of course, her long nails and her micro braids, which Cynthia Erivo says herself was a key deliberate choice in really cementing her character's Blackness. Elphaba's struggles, the whispers, the stares, the constant dismissal of her talents are things that Black people, especially Black women, know all too well when navigating spaces that weren't built for them. Elphaba's green skin acts as a visual cue that invites immediate judgment. People see her as different, undesirable, untrustworthy, and even dangerous before she has a chance to show her intelligence, her kindness, or her strength. From her arrival at Shiz University, she's ostracized, treated like an outsider, and subjected to constant whispers and stares, which gets really annoying in the movie, might I add. Her light-skinned sister gets to exist in the world entirely differently and does little to help her navigate this. Even Glinda, who becomes her closest ally, initially looks down on her, and she's embarrassed by her presence and even goes out of her way to make her existence even more miserable. So this really kind of paints a picture of otherness in society. The way Elphaba is treated mirrors how societal norms often exclude those who don't fit conventional standards of beauty or behavior. In Wicked, her green skin stands in for any visible marker of difference, not just race, but disability or anything that challenges what is considered normal. So adding a racial dimension to this, when Elphaba is portrayed by a Black woman, her otherness takes on a sharper and more resonant meaning. Her green skin becomes more than a metaphor, it's a mirror of the lived experiences of navigating whiteness as a marginalized individual. Let's call this the being the only one concept. At Shiz, Elphaba is one of a kind, a visible minority in a predominantly white space. That kind of hypervisibility is exhausting because it means that you're constantly under scrutiny. People judge her before she even opens her mouth. She's dismissed, not because she lacks talent or intelligence, but because she doesn't conform to the societal ideals that everyone else fits into so easily. This dynamic is particularly striking in scenes where Elphaba's brilliance and moral clarity are on full display, but it's completely overshadowed by her appearance. People see her difference before they see her humanity, and that fear of what they don't understand keeps them from truly recognizing her worth, which is an experience that a lot of Black people and a lot of Black women are familiar with. And then I remembered this quote from James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. "You were born where you were born and faced the future that you faced because you were Black and for no other reason. The limits of your ambition were thus expected to be set forever. You were born into a society which spelled out with brutal clarity in as many ways as possible that you were a worthless human being. You were not expected to aspire to excellence. You were expected to make peace with mediocrity." This line perfectly captures Elphaba's experience. Her green skin isn't just the reason that she's othered, it's what allows the world to elevate people like Glinda. The wizard system only works because it casts Elphaba as the villain and the scapegoat, the darkness that makes everyone else's goodness shine brighter. With Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba, this metaphor becomes, again, sharper, clearer, and harder to ignore. Casting a Black woman in this role connects Elphaba's story to the real-world dynamics of race, power, and privilege. It reminds us that the systems that exclude and demonize marginalized people often rely on that exclusion to justify themselves. Elphaba's green skin, like Baldwin's words, forces us to confront the question, what does it cost to uphold someone else's light, and why does that light need our darkness to shine? To add to that, we also see the angry Black woman trope in full effect here. Elphaba's story also highlights how society responds to marginalized individuals when they refuse to conform. Her rejection of the wizard's corrupt system isn't just an act of rebellion, it's a necessary stand against oppression. But instead of being seen as principled or brave, she's immediately labeled wicked. This mirrors the real-world experiences of Black women who are often stereotyped as angry or difficult simply for speaking out against unfair systems. Her defiance makes people uncomfortable because it challenges the status quo. And rather than confront the injustice she's pointing out, they demonize her. That's the core of how systems maintain their power. They silence those who resist and turn them into the villains of the story. One of the most gut-wrenching aspects of Elphaba's story is how deeply other people's treatment of her chips away at her sense of self-worth. This theme already carries so much emotional weight, but when you view it through the lens of race, especially as a Black woman, It resonates on an even more personal level. Elphaba spends her entire life feeling unseen, undervalued, and like she has to apologize just for existing. She's constantly overlooked for people who fit into society's mold, none more glaringly than Glinda. This hits especially hard in I'm Not That Girl. In this scene, Elphaba clocks Fiero's immediate preference for Glinda, even though she knows that she has so much to offer. Elphaba is witty, she's intelligent, she's principled. Things like on paper make her more than worthy of love and admiration, but none of that matters because the world only sees her difference and it sees it as a bad thing. And listen, if you're a Black woman, especially a dark skinned Black woman, this moment feels a bit like a sucker punch because it's all too familiar. It mirrors that all too familiar experience of being treated as less than desirable, less worthy, simply because you don't fit into Eurocentric standards of beauty. So this also plays into romantic dynamics and power imbalances. Elphaba's longing for Fiero and the way she compares herself to Glinda reflect a harsh truth about how the world often elevates white women while devaluing Black women. Glinda represents everything society prizes: beauty, charm, and whiteness. She doesn't have to fight for attention or admiration. It's given to her effortlessly. Meanwhile, Elphaba has to work twice as hard, maybe thrice as hard, just to be noticed. And even then, she's dismissed because she doesn't conform to society's ideals. What's heartbreaking is that Elphaba internalizes this. She looks at herself and genuinely believes, I'm not that girl, when she most definitely is that girl. And this is something that Cynthia Erivo actually talked about herself in a BuzzFeed interview with other Black women. She said that through playing Elphaba, she was able to take the green skin off, the green paint off, and look at herself and feel more beautiful in her own skin through going on this journey. Let's take a look.
I don't know why it only just hit me more, but probably mainly because it was you that's playing it, about the power of being seen as, obviously as Elphaba, but also just generally as a Black woman. And then in the UK, unfortunately in the UK, if you're a black woman, it's not like to be seen and not to be not heard and seen. It's just like don't exist at all. And I know you've been talking about how Black women are erased through life, through media, through things that we're celebrated in. And I just wanted to ask how this role helped you kind of pull through that, and also the experiences. That was that then more emotional for you because you obviously have these experiences as a Black woman.
No, I what was wonderful about this role is that all those feelings that you have, the moments of feeling unseen, the moments of feeling erased, the moments of feeling literally like sometimes that you just, no one's looking at you, they can't see you. This was a really wonderful way to put a light on that for anybody who feels like they aren't seen, for anybody who feels like they aren't welcome, they don't belong. This gives you an opportunity to, one, process those feelings and share them, and also to give people a perspective on what it feels like and what it looks like when a person is erased and isn't included or is made to feel like they're on the outside.
Now let's address this. Elphaba's pain isn't rooted in jealousy. We're not jealous of you, though I won't pretend that it isn't a factor or a byproduct of these dynamics sometimes. What's really happening here is Elphaba's recognizing how deeply unfair the playing field is for her, and she even just resigns to her fate. She knows that it's not about who she is as a person, it's about a world that's designed to celebrate people like Glinda while pushing people like her to the margins. And that realization over time creates this deep sense of inadequacy that can lead to self-doubt, resentment, and honestly exhaustion. When Cynthia Erivo brings her lived experience as a Black woman into the role of Elphaba, I'm Not That Girl becomes more than just a ballad of unrequited love. It's a reflection of systemic bias. It's about how the world teaches marginalized people to believe they're unworthy, even when they're extraordinary. Elphaba's story is powerful because it captures both the heartbreak of that invisibility and the strength it takes to keep going despite it. And in the end, Fiora kind of looks like he's checking for her too anyway. So it's a reminder that the problem isn't her, it's the world that refuses to see her brilliance. And speaking of not that girl, something that really stood out to me in this version of Wicked was how they portrayed the dynamics of friendships between Black women and white women. Ariana Grande's Glinda and Cynthia Erivo's Elphaba brought so much nuance to this relationship. And as a Black woman who's had plenty of white female friends, I felt seen, girl. They really held some space for me. Sorry, I had to. I've got a lot to say about these kinds of friendships because let's be honest, friendships with white women can be great and rewarding, but also really messy and complicated. And what made this version of Wicked so powerful was how they nailed those moments of tension. I could see some of my own experiences reflected in Glinda and Elphaba's relationship. And I think a big part of that is credit to the bond that Cynthia and Ariana Grande clearly have off screen, because I feel like it really came through. Elphaba's response to Glinda in defying gravity is one of the most powerful moments in the story, made even more impactful when viewed through the lens of race and privilege. They start off hating each other, but it's because each one has something the other wants. What makes Elphaba and Glinda's relationship so interesting is how much they envy each other. Elphaba admires how Glinda fits in so easily, how she's loved and celebrated for just being herself. Glinda, on the other hand, envies Elphaba's strength, her power, her authenticity. Elphaba refuses to conform even when it costs her everything, and that's something Glinda can't even imagine doing. It's bittersweet because it's obvious that they care so much for each other, but the way the world treats them creates a rift that they can't fully bridge. And we really see that come to head at the end of the movie. A theme that I want to touch on here is sympathy versus empathy. While Glinda clearly cares about Elphaba a lot, her care often stops at sympathy. It does not extend into empathy. And there's a big difference between these two terms. Sympathy allows Glinda to feel sorry for Elphaba, but it does not require her to understand what Elphaba is truly going through or to confront her own privilege as a white woman. Sympathy can sometimes feel like distance, like they're looking at your experience from the outside instead of standing in it with you. This dynamic plays out pretty clearly when it comes to the wizard's nefarious plans for the animals. Glinda can see that what's happening is wrong, but for her, it's more of this abstract injustice, a cause that she can engage with or disengage with as she pleases, like, serving on a charity board. For Elphaba, it's a lived reality that she can't separate from herself, as she knows exactly what it's like to be in a world that doesn't F with you and that is coming for you, like the people who are coming for the animals. We see this come to a head in Defying Gravity when Glinda says, "Why can't you just stay calm for once instead of flying off the handle?" Now, when you really read into that line, there's a lot going on here. It reflects the way privileged individuals often dismiss the emotional responses of marginalized people. For Glinda, Elphaba's reaction seems over the top, something she could have avoided if she had just played along. But when you're moving through the world as a Black woman, as a marginalized person, somebody who's been ostracized their entire life, you can't just tap in and out of that experience. Or if you do, it's going to take something from you. You can't just ignore the harm being done, especially when it's coming from the very systems that you spent your entire life resisting. This moment speaks to a larger dynamic in friendships between Black women and white women, the disconnect that can occur when one friend is able to dip in and out of causes or struggles, while the other cannot. For Elphaba, siding with the wizard would mean betraying not just the animals, but her own values and identity as someone who understands oppression firsthand. While for Glinda, complying with the wizard feels like the easiest and smartest choice. And then we get Elphaba's clapback. "I hope you're proud how you would grovel in submission to feed your own ambition." Okay, I'm gonna stop singing. I'm a theater kid. This line, it says so much about the privilege Glinda has as a white woman. She's willing to go along with the wizard, even if it hurts others, as long as it helps her climb the ladder. And Elphaba calls her out for it. This is Elphaba directly calling out the privilege that Glinda wields as a white woman. Glinda's ability to grovel in submission to the wizard reflects how privilege often allows people to conform and advance within systems that oppress others. Something that white women are notorious for. I'm just gonna put that out there. I love you guys. During the suffrage movement, some white women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton was salty when black men got the vote through the 15th Amendment in 1870. They argued that it was unfair for black men, many of whom were former slaves, to vote before them, using racist rhetoric about being more educated and even teaming up with white supremacists to push their case. This created major tension, especially with black women like Ida B. Wells and Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who were fighting for both racial and gender equality. Instead of uniting, many white suffragettes prioritized their own advancement, sidelining black activists. In the end, black women had to fight for everyone else while also advocating for themselves, because who else was going to? Glinda's ambition is rooted in privilege, in the very systems that oppress people like Elphaba. She can't understand why Elphaba would walk away from power, because for her, the idea of rejecting that kind of advancement is unthinkable. But Elphaba knows the cost of playing along. As a black woman, she knows that power gained through submission isn't real power. It's just another way of keeping marginalized people in line. Now, I was going to leave it at that, but I really wanted to come for the wizard and the wizard's manipulation of Glinda and his oppression of marginalized peoples. So the wizard isn't just a character in Wicked, he is a symbol of how systems of privilege manipulate those at the top to maintain control over those at the margins. His entire act of power relies on smoke and mirrors and the ability to pit people against each other. Does this sound familiar? America has a problem! Glinda's privilege as a beloved, beautiful, charismatic figure makes her the perfect pawn. The wizard knows the world already sees her as good, so he leans into that perception, using her status to validate his agenda. Glinda, who is eager to please and maintain her position, plays along often unknowingly, but her compliance helps uphold the very system that oppresses people like Elphaba. And girl just needs to do some work to see what's happening. When the wizard vilifies Elphaba as wicked, he's not just silencing her resistance, but he is creating a clear binary for the world to follow. Glinda is the hero, and Elphaba is the threat. This narrative reinforces the status quo, ensuring that those who conform, like Glinda, are rewarded, and those who challenge the system, like Elphaba, are cast out. Shout out to Luigi. The most chilling part is the wizard never gets his hands dirty. He hides behind this facade of charm and benevolence, leaving others like Glinda to do his dirty work. Glinda's privilege blinds her to how she's being used, making her complicit in the system that oppresses her closest friend. This dynamic is one of the most powerful allegories in Wicked, how privilege is weaponized to uphold systems of oppression, often at the expense of those who step out of line. Elphaba's defiance exposes the wizard's manipulation, but it also highlights the cost of resistance. For the wizard, power isn't about magic, it's about control, and nothing solidifies control better than convincing the world that those who resist are the enemy. Kind of like what people are trying to do to Luigi right now. So here's my ruling.
Listen.
Wicked is definitely for the Black queens. Cynthia Erivo's Elphaba redefines Wicked, turning it into a story that speaks directly to the experiences of Black women, but not just Black women, all marginalized people. It's not just about being misunderstood, it's about navigating a world that judges you before it knows you, who resists your brilliance and calls you wicked when you refuse to conform. Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba brings so much depth to this. She's just a misunderstood witch. She's a Black woman navigating a world that's constantly trying to diminish her, even as it elevates her best friend. It's painful, but it's real, and it makes this story even more relevant than ever, especially for us Black girls. So to anyone that watched Wicked and was as emotional and teary as me, who is a person of color, just know that I don't think that there was any coincidence in that when you look at the person playing Elphaba is a Black woman. But let me know what you thought. Let me know what you thought about my hot takes. I love reading your comments, love hearing what you have to say. Please comment, like, and subscribe. And let me know if you have any ideas for other videos that you would like to see. Thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed making this video, and I feel like I've been sitting on these thoughts about Wicked for a really long time. So it's been good to actually get them out and present them in a structured argument. So to all my Black queens who feel like they are a Elphaba in a world that favors Glindas, we got you, girl.